So, Paul, you wrote this Substack, and it's all about MMT, and you say MMT is not the answer. Well, I'm going to show people what Stephanie Kelton, who Professor Wolf just talked about, was the economic advisor to Bernie Sanders. She's going to explain to us what MMT is, and then I'm going to get your reaction. Here, let's watch this.
One of a handful of economists who contributed to the body of academic scholarship known as MMT, or modern monetary theory. MMT provides an accurate description of how a fiat currency, like the US dollar or the British pound, actually works. It reminds us that we're no longer on a gold standard, so finding the money to pay for the things we need is never an issue for countries like the US or the UK.
So she's saying basically what
I'm allowed to laugh, right?
It's Wile E. Coyote magic. She doesn't look down and just stop, don't look down. And we could make this thing not even a foundation of sand.
So she's saying basically...
Oh, it's the movie Don't Look Up. It's the more current movie Don't Look Up.
Yeah. So that's just a precursor. Now I'm going to play, this is about 3 minutes long. Here, she's going to explain how it actually works in reality, and let's listen to it.
In theory.
Finding the votes to pass a spending bill can be hard, but finding the money is never a problem. They just create it. So here's how it works. Whenever Congress and the president agree to spend more, the government's bank, the Federal Reserve, works with the rest of the financial system to get that money into our accounts. Everything's done electronically, so there's no physical printing of money involved. If you got a $1,400 check from the federal government earlier this year, or if your company received money to help cover payroll and other expenses, then you received some of the newly minted digital dollars that were created to support our economy. No taxpayers were involved in that process. It was all done using nothing more than a computer keyboard. So why are we hearing so much about the need to raise taxes to pay for infrastructure and make other investments in our economy? In a word, deficits. We've all been conditioned to worry about deficits. So lawmakers are looking for ways to spend more without adding to the deficit. And that's what this whole pay-for game is about. Unfortunately, deficits have gotten a bad rap. They're almost always seen in a negative light. And I would like to change that. When we hear the word deficit, we probably think of a deficiency or shortfall. Okay, a deficit always sounds ominous. So when we hear that the federal government just ran a $3 trillion budget deficit, it can sound worrying. And it can even anger people. But there's another way to think about government deficits. Just as a 6 becomes a 9 when we view it from a different angle, a government deficit becomes a financial surplus when we look at it from another perspective. A deficit hawk might look at this picture and see nothing but a sea of worrying red ink. That's not how I look at it. Here's what I see. I see what's happening on the other side of the government's ledger. When the government spends more than it taxes away from us, it makes a financial contribution to some other part of the economy. Their red ink is our black ink. When you look at it this way, it becomes clear that every deficit is good for someone. The question is, for whom? And what are those deficits being used to accomplish? It matters how the money is spent and who ends up with the resulting surplus. Tax cuts that deliver huge windfalls for those at the top without sparking investment and opportunity for the rest of the population don't make good use of deficits. On the other hand, spending trillions to support the economy during the pandemic put the deficit to good use. We just had the shortest recession in U.S. history. To me, that was fiscally responsible. Being responsible shouldn't mean running the government's finances like a household. Instead of trying to keep the deficit in check, Congress should be focused on keeping inflation in check. That's the real limit on spending. And it's the thing to watch out for if you're thinking about spending trillions on things like infrastructure, healthcare, and free college. Instead of asking, how will we pay for it? Congress should be asking, how will we resource it? To answer that question, think of people, factories, equipment, and raw materials like wood and iron. If we're going to build high-speed rail, fix crumbling infrastructure, and green our economy, then we'll need concrete, steel, and lumber. We'll need construction workers, architects, and engineers. We'll need companies that can fill thousands of orders for solar panels, EV charging stations, and electric school buses. If our economy has the productive capacity to quickly supply all of those things, then we can easily resource it. Or take healthcare or free college. Paying the bills to expand Medicare to include dental, vision, and hearing is easy. The challenge is making sure we have enough dentists, optometrists and audiologists to treat everyone who needs care. And if you want a resource-free college, then you need the faculty, the classrooms, and the dormitories to teach and house more students. In a full employment economy, all of the resources you need are, well, fully employed. There's no spare capacity anywhere in the system. So if the government suddenly tried to make all of these investments at once, it would quickly discover that it doesn't have the people or the building materials to do the work. To get the resources it needs, it would have to compete with the private sector, bidding up wages and prices. That would be inflationary, and it would be fiscally irresponsible. We are a long way from full employment. We have the resources we need to begin repairing our broken systems, but we have to believe it's possible. We can't let words like debt and deficits hold us back. With a better understanding of public money, where it comes from, and how it works, we can take aim at the many real deficits that are bearing down on us. In every crisis lies an opportunity. We can pick up the pieces and try to reassemble the fragile systems that were in place before the pandemic, or we can build anew, shaping our bountiful resources into the kind of world we want to live in, one that cares for our people
Great reset.
and our planet. I truly hope we choose to be bold. Thank you.
Oh,
So, okay, so she touched on the problem there, Paul, didn't she? She touched on, well, here's what you say.
Not sure what side she's
because the
on.
problem is when you print money and spend it, that it creates inflation. And inflation's bad for everybody. And now we have banks that are we're going to talk about in a second, that are failing again because of inflation. Here's what you said. By pushing in your Substack, you said by pushing for unchecked government spending as long as resources are available, MMT could lead to wasteful public sector expenditures, okay, stifle private sector innovation and competitiveness, and let's not overlook the potential moral hazard, encouraging governments to rack up debt with the assumption it can always be printed away, burdening future generations with higher taxes and lower quality of life, and of course, inflation, which is exactly what happened when they pumped $5 trillion into the economy with the CARES Act. Those $5 trillion, by the way, when the government spent it, didn't go to the things that people really want it to go to. It went to the pockets of a couple of thousand millionaires and billionaires. So
what's the downside?
So Paul, what is your response to her explaining that we should just print money and that deficits aren't bad?
Well, first of all, she's very well spoken. And I appreciate that she believes in what she believes. It's just that it's another theory. So on the face of it, it's just an idea. And she's asking us to be bold at the end. And she's not offering any proof of how anything would actually work right. Now, for all of us who actually live in the real world out here in the economy, when she says we can't run the government like we would run a household, that's insane. Because how is the government different than a household? It has to deal with reality. So when we talk about having to balance our checkbooks, right? If we don't have the money, we can take on some debt, credit card debt, and then we got to look at how much extra that dinner costs when you tack on 15% interest because we bought it on a credit card, right? So we have to look at those things because we don't have unlimited resources. When the government considers suddenly that it does have unlimited resources, then it destroys the system that's actually here and built by the people. Because now it's like this giant aircraft carrier that's just rushing through our town and breaking everything up. It's this massive beast that we can't check. And it isn't willing to check itself. And that's where waste comes in. And that's not even the biggest threat. But when you have to balance your checkbook, you'll have to say no to some things. Well, we can't take that 5-star trip, but we can take that 3.5-star trip and get a canoe and have a nice time out at the lake cabin, right? The government just wants 5-star everything. There's nothing checking the efficacy of their ideas tested into reality before they actually pull the trigger because they've it's like my father's old saying, the government never has enough money to do it right, but they always have enough to do it over. And that's at the heart of government. That's why I harp on the fact that they've never really solved any problems. They just create them. But that's quick example, if I could give you one example. Let's say all the farmers around the world decided to grow 1 trillion ears of corn. They said, forget soy, forget this, forget that, we're all growing corn. So they grow corn. Every ear of that corn would have the exact same nutritional value as a country away. or stayed away. They would all have the same value. But when you issue money out of thin air, it destroys the value of the money already in the system. So the last point is, how ludicrous is it to think inflation has just arrived recently when a home is $20,000 in 1971 and $440,000 today? That's inflation. That's inflation. Commodity prices in general are 1,800% since the creation of the Federal Reserve 110 years ago. That's inflation. Why are we acting like it just arrived?
So that's what we're living in now. So it's amazing how, I mean, I've had Stephanie Kelton on the show, and I'm not an economist by any stretch of the imagination, but I just had on Professor Wolf, who's a self-described Marxist, and he says that the problem is the deficit. He says that right now the interest that we're paying on the deficit is as big as our military budget.
Right.
So
wait, Jimmy,
it's just the interest.
You got to look at it from two. Sure, that's one way of looking at it, Jimmy. Wile E. Coyote is falling off the cliff, but I like to look at it as Wile E. Coyote flying to the moon.
Yeah. If you just turn the earth upside down, that's what he's doing.
If you just invert everything, it becomes a good thing.
I mean, she is right in a sense that they don't raise taxes to pay for shit.
Well, right. So here's where I think the world learned that lesson.
Go ahead.
1991, George H.W. kicked Saddam's ass in the Middle East. His approval rating is 94% going into re-election. A little recession kicks off, but he had promised he wouldn't raise taxes. Read my lips. And what did he do? He raised taxes. Cost him re-election, perhaps. And the whole world just recognized after that, because that's one hell of a seat of power to have. Just print the money next time. Yes. Don't raise the taxes.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
So, there's $34 trillion in debt right now.
Yes.
Debt.
And just in the federal debt. That doesn't count what states owe. That doesn't count the M2 supply, the debt the Federal Reserve has created out of thin air, which is around $22 trillion. It doesn't count a lot of stuff. It's just one huge bill.
I've heard people say that the United States is never going to pay off that debt.
Can we bundle it?
And so
could it?
And yeah. So what historically happens when a country gets into a position where it can't pay off its debt, it starts a war. And I just fear, because the bankers run everything, and there's a saying, every war is a banker's war. And
you can work it off with a nice war.
And so it looks like they're trying to start wars all over the place. They're trying to start a war with Russia, a nuclear power. They're trying to start a war with China. They're trying to start a war with Iran in the Middle East. I just hope that this debt, to me, that's the another big problem, is that historically countries start wars when they have debts they can't pay off.
You mean blood sacrifice?
Let me make one more point here about modern monetary theory. So first of all, it's modern, which means they just came up with it recently because they're just stymied by the fact that they have to keep creating money out of thin air. So now they're going to legitimize it by saying it's modern monetary theory. And theory isn't proof. It's just an idea that's just to be tested. The idea is, for all the folks watching, it's the government's belief that money is a commodity, that the government can create as much of it as it wants in perpetuity, which is forever. And that dollar will never be, quote unquote, worthless or taken out to the woodshed, shot in the head, and replaced by another currency. That's where I talk about the ears of corn. Create 4 trillion ears of corn around the world. Every ear will have the same nutritional value as another one. But when you create money out of thin air, it destroys the value of the money. So you can't have these arguments without noticing that the dollar today is sunk to a value of only worth 2.7 cents.
Jesus.
So as you print, you kill. So modern monetary theory would assume that we can print money until the dollar's worth 1/100th of a penny, and a Starbucks is $80, and your $100,000 a year salary is $600,000 a year, and just everything just keeps going up and up and up and up and up. But what they miss is 40% of this country doesn't earn enough money to have to pay taxes, which means where it's good and shiny and wealthy, it isn't in most of the land. Most of the land is struggling. And to me, that's evil.
What if it identifies as valuable?
So here is Alan Greenspan, the former chairman of the Fed. Everybody knows this guy. And so here's what he said on Meet the Press about America's debt and why we don't ever have to worry about our debt. Here's what he said.
The United States can pay any debt it has because we can always print money to do that. So there is zero probability of default.
So then I would say, and I'm sure the host didn't, I would say back to him, then why don't they just go print $34 trillion and pay off our goddamn debt? Why don't they do that? Because that would create a disaster. That would devalue the dollar to nothing. We would have hyperinflation.
Yes. And
that's the end. That's how you end your country.
Ruin the magic spell.
Right. That ruins the magic spell. So he's kind of being a charlatan. He's using chicanery, right? When he makes that.
Talking to me like a 5-year-old.
Right.
And I do know nothing. That's good. You could just go forever. Phew, thanks, guy that looks like Rupert Murdoch, except he doesn't have the accent.
So it's like, so we can just print it and pay it off. We just haven't gotten around to it yet. So go ahead.
When a company takes on debt, it's also a revenue generating machine, right? So it has some mechanism to its operations that brings money in-house. Right. And a company would rarely ever owe more than it brings in, for the year. Right. The government has no revenue generation element to it. It is simply just sucking stuff out of the economy and then redistributing it back to the economy as it chooses. It doesn't it doesn't have the ability to generate money to pay down its debt. And because of its decisions, it has to continue to print more. So the debt continues to rise. Inflation continues to rise. So they have to print more, and on it goes. But now they're in this position where they have to raise rates, which stymies economic growth internally, organically. So as the economy dies further and further and further of living off of its own revenue generation, its own steam, it takes on an artificial lifeline from the federal printing press. And eventually you don't have an economy anymore. You have zombie institutions and zombie companies and just pretty much a zombie economy that is living in a falsehood because it doesn't live within the means of its own reality. Yeah, the government is subsidizing that falsehood by what it creates out of thin air. But eventually you do end up with what's proven throughout history, hyperinflation, the death of institutions, and the inability to earn enough money to pay for the cost of living whatsoever. And then the working part of the economy just stops. That's what people really have to wake up to, is that you have the option to bet on someone's new theory or bet on what history has already proven. And then really start thinking for yourselves. It's why I love your show. That's why I love you, Jimmy. You inspire and educate folks to think for themselves. And these types of discussions, like here on the TED Talk, should really be alarming people who understand reality is the only thing you can bank on. It's the only thing you can trust. And when the government loses, you lose.
I believe having a substantial percentage of my financial future secured with gold and silver. I do believe in that. You know this if you watch this show. That's why I decided to partner with our sponsor, Colonial Metals Group. They helped me set up a safe and secure self-directed IRA where I have access to my assets no matter what the stock market, or for that matter, what the government is doing. Let the team of experts at Colonial Metals Group help you protect your family's future. We put together a special offer for our audience. Listen to this offer. Click on the link in the description below or call the special 800 number, which is 888-910-1419, and you'll receive a safe. You're going to get a safe and up to $10,000 in free silver. They say up to. I want to know how much that is going to be. So call 888-910-1419, 888-910-1419, and let a team of experts at Colonial Metals help you protect your family's future. Hey, come see us do a live show. We're going to be in Denver, Colorado, May 11th. Los Angeles, California, doing a live panel show with a celebrity panel and video. Ashland, Virginia, Athens, Georgia, Rutherford, New Jersey, with Max Blumenthal. Minneapolis, Minnesota, Ontario, California, Irvine, California, Chicago, Illinois, with another celebrity panel, live video show in Chicago, and Grand Rapids, Michigan. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets. jimmydore.com for a link for tickets.